Well, welcome to another edition of GPI Forward. Today, we're going to talk about censorship versus responsibility on the web. And to discuss and try to get more light on these complicated matters, we're fortunate to have with us Chris Lewis, who is the Vice President of Public Knowledge. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Paolo. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. First of all, tell us a little bit about your outfit. Tell us what you do and what this is all about.
Sure. Well, I serve as the Vice President at Public Knowledge. Been there almost 7 years now. And our organization was founded as a nonprofit that advocates and talks about policy that promotes freedom of expression online. Also open access to technology. We've generally worked in areas around broadband policy, making sure that folks have affordable access to broadband, that the internet is open and accessible to all, that it's affordable. But it's also those values of freedom of expression have led us to look at policies around online content moderation, especially when it comes to copyrighted material. And so we've done lots of work around copyright law and intellectual property. But in recent years, the last year or so, we have seen the conversation really shift towards how platforms have gotten larger and the responsibilities that they have to take on in order to make sure that folks have access to all the things that they should have access to online, but also that they're protected in certain ways. And so it's been an interesting area to work in, but it's a challenging balance.
Indeed. You say, have access to, which I think it's great, and I think all of us as users want to have that access and get our information and our data, but also you say protected from, maybe, let's call it bad content, for lack of a better word.
Right.
And here's the rub, right? How do we determine what is bad and what is good? And who does it? Just for our listeners, at the moment, as things are in America, who does that? Who determines good content, bad content, if anybody?
Well, right now, there's really two levels of power when it comes to the internet. The first level of power is the user itself, because we've maintained in the United States a relatively open internet. And we have laws that have promoted free expression, laws like Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, or CDA 230.
Talk about that. Talk about it a little bit.
CDA 230, which is short for Communications Decency Act, was created in the 90s just as the internet was really flourishing as a public commercial product. And layman's version is that it make sure that platforms and services online are not held liable for content that is posted by a third party or by users themselves.
Which really means, in kind of in layman's terms, if I am Facebook, right, and somebody's posting something that turns out to be objectionable, nobody can sue me for having allowed my platform to be used as a vehicle to post what turns out to be objectionable material according to whatever stipulation, right?
And not just objectionable, but illegal content.
Yes.
And so, again, we first encountered this when it came to copyright law. You're not allowed to publish other people's copyrighted material without their permission. But because the internet is so powerful and folks can rapidly post things, by the millions every second, the ability for a platform to monitor that they have the ability, but it is very difficult. And so Section 230 allows some relief from that liability for illegal content as well as content that is objectionable.
So let's try to understand, what are the dimensions of the problem. We know, and again, this was kind of prompted by the massacre, unfortunately, that occurred just a few days ago, literally, in New Zealand, in which the perpetrator, the person who decided to engage in mass murder, targeting communities of Muslims in these mosques, who are there, congregating for services. And he thought that it would be this great idea to broadcast this massacre, live, essentially, online. And he managed to do this successfully. And those videos that he produced as he was actually killing people, as awful as this sounds, were all over the place. And it took a while for the platforms to be alerted, I guess, by the New Zealand authorities to say, hey, this is going on, and to take it up. But at that point, the proverbial horses had already left the barn, and you can shut the doors as much as you want. The content was already out, had been duplicated and downloaded and re-downloaded, I don't know how many times. And so even though they took it down, the damage was done. And this is the kinds of problems that we're facing already, but potentially, in other instances, God forbid, of other such horrible situations. Now, what can we do as a society, government, the platforms, the users, everybody, legislatures? I mean, is there anything that can be done about this?
That's the difficult question. And so at Public Knowledge, the way we are approaching this is that there really is a balance of values of free expression and permissionless creativity online that we want to balance against protecting against harmful content like this. And so I described one level of power, which is the decision point at the user. But now, because of this incident, folks are talking about two other levels of power and whether it makes sense to implement checks there. The first level is at the platform itself. What responsibility should a platform have? And we're saying platform, but most people think of a Facebook or a Twitter or YouTube or a Tumblr, but that definition is important. What does a web service, a website, an online platform have as a responsibility to keep harmful content from its users? And who makes that decision? Does the platform make the decision of what is harmful, or does someone else? Most platforms have some sort of standards that they publicize, and that's important because then as a user what is allowed on the platform. And so if something gets taken down because you've violated those standards of service, then you really have nowhere else to go. You have to follow their rules in order to use their platform. But that level of power is ultimately reactive in our current environment and under the current law. These companies react fast, but they can't always move as fast as the internet does because they're reacting after
Indeed.
Something gets posted.
So basically, yes, you cannot prevent something from happening. You may be able to quickly, or rather quickly, try to be as fast as you can to remove it after it's been posted, right?
The way that platforms are set up now, you can't.
Yes.
The question is, do we want to ask or require platforms to change the way they're structured in order to require things to be prevented before they're even posted?
Yeah.
If we do, there are implications that we have to take into account. And then we see that balance shift between security and freedom of expression, between creativity and protecting against illegal and harmful content. And when that balance shifts more towards security, there are things that we could lose. There could be a chilling effect on the development of platforms and what they're willing to allow posted. One example we talked about when you and I were in that conversation earlier was live streaming. Live streaming is the fastest thing we have to react to right now. And the only way to stop something from being live streamed is to not allow it to be streamed at all.
Yeah.
And so, are we going to ask platforms to not allow live streaming? Well, that will change the landscape of the internet. Are we going to ask them to put checks on who they allow to live stream? That could also change the landscape of the internet, because now you're asking for permission to post content in a live streaming format. And then that trickles down to things that aren't real-time live streaming, uploading content that doesn't get posted right away, or do you have to go through hurdles and checks in order to post your content on a platform? And what impact will that have on creators being able to create content when they have to ask for that permission? And then the ultimate check is, does government get involved? If government starts to get involved and put mandates not only on the content but on the platforms itself, how does that come up against principles of free speech that we've really tried to protect in this country, and the benefits of a broad, flat, powerful platform like the internet, those benefits that have been provided to everyday people to be able to create and publish things that could go away.
Well, look, again, just to put this in context, if I may, a little bit, not that I'm going to try to make a history of freedom of expression in the United States, but we've always had, extreme content has always existed.
Yes.
Way back at the age of our founding fathers, it was so-called yellow journalism.
That's right.
Right, which was garbage. Where people were pillared, that people said that George Washington was a British spy, and Abraham Lincoln was a monkey, or some crazy things and wild accusations, etc. But what was on the side of the people at that time was speed, right?
Yes.
And the ability to spread the bad news, which was done usually through printed publications, which took time to produce and edit and distribute, etc. And also the circulation was, limited because literate people were still, I would say minority, but not that many.
Right.
And not many people subscribed to whatever they were, the newspapers or the magazines at the time. So not that we haven't invented this problem today. What we are confronted with, and I think everything you said seems to support this, is the speed at which the stuff spreads, both the good stuff and the bad stuff.
Yes.
And that also, we still have a First Amendment to the United States Constitution, part of the Bill of Rights that says, absolute freedom of expression, whether it's about political views, religious views, or anything else. And that's a blanket. It doesn't say, well, there is absolute freedom except, footnote here. On these issues and those issues, the government can pass laws and can restrict because, that's not freedom of expression. This is bad stuff, and we can regulate that. No,
Right.
We don't have that, right? And
There's so few checks on the First Amendment. We're really talking about
almost nothing.
Dangerous speech, life-threatening speech. The classic example is yelling fire in a crowded theater.
Exactly.
But beyond that, there's almost no limitation.
Because otherwise, you say we're going to, limit political speech and political expression. People can have, maybe some strange political positions, and who are you to say that that's, unconstitutional and that's illegal and that is not protected speech? And if we go down that path, then we go, into kind of an Orwellian world in which Big Brother watches you and tells you what to believe and what not to believe and what you can watch and not watch. So, where we are now is that, again, people say, the big platforms, the usual suspects, the Facebooks, et cetera, should accept responsibility and essentially call themselves publishers and be, therefore, self-police themselves to a much, much higher level than they are doing now, and provide some kind of a line of defense, if you wish, for the public. But then you say, okay, well, that sounds good. Really? Is that? Do we trust the self-policing ability to say, okay, well, this sounds good. Okay, we'll allow this. Or this sounds not so good. We don't allow this. Is that? And we essentially users are on the receiving end of their value judgment, right?
Right.
Is that acceptable?
I'm concerned about the idea of a platform as a publisher. I think it's important that we define them for what they are and not try to fit something that is new and different into a box that we know from the past. We can learn from the past, and certainly we can learn from newspapers and publishing about levers that we might want to use. having editing or editors is certainly a lesson we can learn from publishing. But I don't think just describing a platform as a publisher works, given the broad diversity of platforms that we have out there. Is Facebook a publisher? If so, then we're going to ask Facebook to edit content that is being posted by individual members. However many millions or billions of people are on Facebook, they will have to edit everything that you post on Facebook, because that is the responsibility that comes with a publisher. Perhaps we want to instead define them as a platform and have a conversation, and even a conversation led by government experts about how to define different types of platforms, because Amazon's platform as a marketplace is very different from a social media platform, which is very different from YouTube's video platform, which is different from Twitter's platform, which is more microblogging, and so each of those are created and structured to do different things. But to study those platforms, to understand what they're structured to do, but also to study the impact of the large dominant platforms, I think that's where we need to be right now in order to make careful policies that are applied properly and solve the problems we're trying to solve.
But it seems to me also, forgive me if I try to press this further, but if we say we find a way to improve the environment regarding the existing platforms that everybody knows, the Google, Facebook, and Twitter, et cetera, even though with their different attributions and differentiations, as you just pointed out. And then people say, oh my God, this avenue for my own, evil content is now blocked. Or maybe, well, it's not that complicated in this universe to find other ways, right?
Oh, absolutely. So I would never say that we should apply any sort of regulation to just one of these companies. It's why studying platforms and the different iterations of them is so important, because there could be a small platform you never heard of.
Exactly.
Where harmful content or illegal content could be posted and be accessible. And so we need to think about this broadly. I think we hear about the Facebooks and the YouTubes of the world often because there's just so many people using them. But we have to take the lessons of them and apply them broadly in a way that is fair and that promotes choices for consumers, because it's the choices that consumers have to post in different places and to create their own services that is the democratizing force of the internet. And we want to continue to promote that.
Absolutely. And again, obviously, at the very beginning, as everybody knew or thought at the time, when especially you mentioned the major law that was passed in '96, which was when the internet was still, relatively speaking, in its infancy compared to what it became today, and many of these characters didn't even exist, let alone have the reach that they have now. But in those days, it was kind of popular to believe that the ability of everybody to say anything and post everything, that would also, in a sense, give truth tellers or truth seekers, or if you wish, or fact checkers, an enormous ability to point out bad stuff, right?
Yes.
And to say, you post something that is untrue or tendentious or exaggerated or whatever, and there will be somebody who set you straight, because they will look at your content and say, no, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. This is not true, because the truth is da 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 da, and not this. And the early fake news guy or girl or people or group would be shamed into silence, because they would be shut out just by the outrage generated by their unfair treatment of a situation, a fact, or a political position, or a candidate for political office, or what have you. Well, how did that work out? Not so well, huh? It didn't really play out that way.
I mean, I don't think we anticipated back then the invention of social media, where we see platforms have been created that form bubbles of reality and truth. That's kind of truth in quotations. It's not actually true, but what people believe to be reality, find support in communities where they are not challenged by others. And so, where we can promote ideas being crossing, outside and inside, inside and outside of those bubbles, I think that's good for democracy. At the same time, we want to help people and users and consumers be able to understand, which sources are respected and which sources have been labeled by a broad crowdsourcing of users as perhaps not as reliable. So we were happy to see Microsoft come up with this idea of the NewsGuard, where they are.
Explain what that is.
Yeah, they just announced it recently, but this is a model to build kind of a measurement of trustworthiness that they can put and label on sources of news, so that when consumers see it, they see if it has a high level or a low level of trustworthiness. And their ability, Microsoft and those who sign up to participate in this NewsGuard system will be checking the accuracy of the reporting that they are linking to. And so if this was taken up by social media, it could be an easy way for users to start to understand when something is posted on social media or comes up with on a Google search or a Bing search, that, oh, this is popular, but it also might not be as trusted as this other source that maybe is coming up lower on the search. And I think that's beneficial. And so, platforms that are testing with these sorts of tools hopefully can help us as a society wrestle with some of these struggles that we have, with trust in what people are reading online.
But again, just to press this a little further, who monitors the monitors?
Absolutely.
Who determines that the people who try in good faith, I suppose, to provide this public service and these advisories, if you wish, to say some kind of peer review, right? Like they do in scientific journals, that you submit something and, and other people in your field check it out and say, well, this looks like legit. This looks like a genuine piece of research. It's not been plagiarized. It's not, and so they say, okay, green light, publish this thing. Is that a fair analogy, or is this going to be different? Because
I think things could be posted whether or not they have a high score, but it's having some sort of quick check to know if something has a low or high score is what we're looking for. That is easily identifiable and understandable by the user. I think think of it like a nutrition label, although I don't think they're modeling it in that way. But nutrition labels are now understood easily, where consumers look and they can quickly tell is
what's
this healthy
there?
or is this not healthy?
Yeah, what's in there? But could this become some kind of a veiled censorship, that because I have certain, I'm a good person, I have that, but I have certain political views, and then somebody puts in front of me content that is of a different, vintage, different label or whatever, and I say, this doesn't look so good to me. So yeah, you can post it, but I give it a low score, and in that sense, I delegitimize or try to delegitimize a political view, and we're not talking about gory, horrible stuff like New Zealand, but in general, that becomes a way to discriminate against content I simply disagree with.
No, I think that's the real question for NewsGuard, and who are they using as the judges? I think they should be certainly certified, qualified people to act as judges. And if you disagree with NewsGuard, then you can start your own labeling service, and you could certainly imagine a world where folks from the extreme right, folks from the extreme left, or folks from other extreme positions put their own label on certain content. But for mainstream sites, a Twitter or a Facebook, mainstream search engines like Google, I'd be interested to see how that works out, where they are trying to give signals to their users that are broadly understood and don't necessarily adhere to the extremes.
So you think this holds promise? This is new, right? This is
something that they're just rolling out, and so I think we
it's
want to see how it
untested.
works.
It's untested,
Yeah.
so let's give it a shot.
And these are the ideas that we want to look at because we haven't yet figured out how to, have the government mandate that platforms do certain things in order to protect their users. There's some small ideas out there dealing with that have come up in legislation around dealing with bots. And that you should know whether or not you're talking to a bot or whether you're talking to an actual human online. Some of those ideas are interesting, but we need to socialize these and see how they work.
How do we fix that? I mean, this is kind of a different level of the same problem. We know a lot about, just the special counsel Mueller just ended his investigation, and whatever, he determined that the Trump campaign was not involved in any collusion with Russians, but certainly it did determine quite clearly that the Russians did actively try to subvert, in a sense, or influence our political process by injecting all kinds of stuff, mostly garbage, to create confusion within American public.
And to sow division.
Yeah. And they did this, it seems, again, I'm not the expert here, but cheaply, right? They spent a few $100,000, maybe not even that,
That's right,
to cause quite a bit of chaos. And the public quite often had no idea. I mean, in fact, I would say in all cases, had no idea about the origin of this content, where it was concocted, manufactured, etc.
Yeah, I think
Can we protect the public against the reoccurrence of such situations like the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential elections?
I think we need to try some of these solutions, and we need to continue to look for other solutions. To enact them and put some of these requirements on platforms, to look at identifying bots, identifying trusted sources. I think this is a place to start. But in the end, we're going to have to apply them broadly, and we're going to have to see how they work with different types of platforms. And so again, the definition of a platform is very important, and the requirements that you put on them without limiting free expression are going to be challenging. And so we have to study the different ways that they work, and really think about the broad implications of how you apply certain regulations to certain platforms in certain situations.
Let's try to kind of see if we can embrace this whole problem, as big as it is, and try to give our listeners a sense of what we're really talking about.
Okay.
The internet now, how many billions of people are we talking about on a daily basis are on the internet?
Gosh,
billions, right?
Definitely in the billions, yes.
So, and the bad stuff, such as it is, it's certainly a fraction of an enormous amount of content that is out there, most of which is legit. You may find it stupid, silly, maybe superficial, frivolous. People who put their, YouTube videos of their cat that does funny things and get
very popular, large audience for cat videos.
And get millions of hits. But you can say it's stupid, but it's not objectionable or harmful or malicious or racist or something like that, right? So so we're really talking about a fraction of the entire content, but that causes these huge problems of trying to police this enormous environment that is, by the way, growing every day. And we haven't seen the end of it. It's like the internet is not finished. In other words, we don't know the new frontiers, the new possibilities, the new platforms, the new devices, the new things that will come. And maybe 10 years from now, if we have the same conversation, we'll be talking about entirely different things because the mechanics of the whole thing have changed, the users have changed, and everything is completely different. So here in the United States, we've got principles which were established hundreds of years ago,
yes,
right? The First Amendment to the Constitution. And then we developed a kind of a universe of traditional media in accordance to that, with the understanding that the government would not police free speech.
Yeah.
It certainly would not limit free speech except for the extreme circumstances you outlined earlier on, like, shouting fire in a crowded theater.
Now, there is a history of the United States putting regulations on platforms. We talked about the printing press and newspapers or broadsheets. Think about the broadcast era, because there were limited opportunities to get content available or to produce your own content, I should say, for broadcast, and because they used the public airwaves. The FCC and government authorities put restrictions on what could be produced and shown on broadcast television.
Mm-hmm.
They created standards.
Of fairness, right? Also, if you express one point of view, you got to give space to the other point of view.
Well, actually,
Cases,
that's
right?
you're talking about the fairness doctrine. That was something that was created, and that actually was repealed. So there actually is no fairness doctrine or standard anymore. But there are quality and standards for decency that are applied to broadcast. And so, how do you, given that history, can you learn lessons from the values that you tried to promote with previous communications technologies? We argue that you can, but what we had an expert agency who understood those technologies. They understood communications networks, they understood broadcast and media. This was the Federal Communications Commission. Why not, again, I'm talking about studying, why not empower experts led by the government through congressional hearings, through expert agencies to study digital platforms and how they work, and look at how we want to protect the values that are important to us. Diversity of expression and freedom of expression, securing and protecting people from harmful content, promoting competition, so that because it's the competitive options and the ability to move from one part of the internet to the other that makes it so powerful, and that empowers people to create without asking for permission. If we think about how we promote those values and balance them with some of the security concerns, then we can come up with some ideas, hopefully, that can be tested out in the marketplace. So, one idea out there is the importance of promoting interoperability of platforms. So, yes, if Facebook has a standard and they restrict certain things on their platform, you could go to a smaller, lesser-known platform. But what happens when you are so invested in the content that you've put up on Facebook that it's hard for you to leave? There's a network effect of platforms that makes it difficult for you to leave because everyone else is on the platform. It's the reason people are on Facebook, where you may not have that same network effect on a smaller platform. So when a platform is so dominant that the cost of being excluded from it, cost of exclusion, we think is an important metric.
You want to comply then. Yeah.
Then perhaps there are rules that should be applied to platforms that are dominant based on cost of exclusion. Yeah. And those rules could promote competition, could promote the portability of data so consumers have choices. And then, when consumers have choices, they can choose, they can, move in the marketplace, with their feet or digitally with their feet. Yeah.
Well, again, we're not going to solve all this, today, but overall, and given this broad overview, and we really thank you so much for giving us context on an admittedly very complicated problem with all sorts of issues. Some are ethical, some are technical, some are legal, some are constitutional. But from where you stand, given your experience and the kind of work you do, are you optimistic about finding ways, I'm not saying to solve this, but at least to improve it? And again, we started with the issue of mass shooting and massacres, but we know there's a lot more than just that
Right.
we should be concerned with. Are you optimistic going forward, given the level of awareness that has been developed in the among the various relevant
Right.
communities and stakeholders, that something more constructive will come out of this and that we get a better cyberspace as a result?
I'm optimistic that we're having the conversation here in a country where we've always bent over backwards and promoted freedom of expression. We're a free enough country that we can have this conversation, and we try to wrestle with the difficulties of that balance. And so that makes me optimistic. But it doesn't mean it's not going to be difficult. But making policy and balancing values that can be in conflict sometimes is difficult. It's been the challenge of this country. Whether it's the balance of the First Amendment and freedom of speech, or the balance of the First Amendment and freedom of expression. I meant freedom of the press. These are all things that we've had to balance over time. We will always have to work to do that as new technologies arise, and I don't think that changes with these large platforms that are powerful and provide great benefits, but bring challenges because of their speed and their reach. Is something that we have not seen before. It's unprecedented, and so we have to learn to wrestle with that change in technology.
Well, with that, on this at least a mildly optimistic note, we want to thank Chris Lewis, the Vice President of Public Knowledge. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll have you back because this story is not clearly over, and hopefully the next time we meet, there would be more, who knows, more positive news regarding the rolling out of the Microsoft Enterprise, this new system that you just mentioned, and maybe other things.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to talking more about it. We didn't even get into some of the things that Facebook's trying with their algorithms and so forth. So, we should definitely continue this conversation.
Very good. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.